A boy nobody would look at twice, just saved the one thing a billionaire couldn't buy back. And before anyone standing on that sidewalk could even ask his name, he was already gone. It happened in less than 4 seconds. The kind of moment that separates an ordinary afternoon from the day a family never stops talking about. A car came within inches of taking the life of a 7-year-old girl named Lily Ashcroft, the only daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the country. And the person who stepped in front of that danger without a second of hesitation wasn't a bodyguard, wasn't a stranger with training, wasn't anyone the Ashcroft family's extensive security detail had ever noticed standing nearby. It was a teenage boy named Ben Whitfield, dressed in a worn jacket, carrying a backpack that had clearly seen better years. Someone the world had trained to walk past without a second glance. By the time Nathaniel Ashcroft reached his daughter, his security team scrambling behind him, his heart still pounding from the 4 longest seconds of his life, Ben was already stepping back, already trying to disappear into the ordinary crowd of a street he had never expected to matter to anyone. Nathaniel tried to speak to him, tried to offer thanks, a reward, anything that might come close to expressing what this stranger had just done for his family. Ben said very little. He looked at Lily one more time to make sure she was truly all right, and then he turned and walked away, leaving behind nothing but a single blurry photograph someone in the crowd had managed to capture. By the end of this video, you will know exactly who that boy was, and why finding him became the most important thing Nathaniel Ashcroft had ever done. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand why a boy would walk away from gratitude, from reward, from every reasonable reason to stay, you first need to understand 3 things about the people standing on that sidewalk. First, who was Ben Whitfield really? And why did a boy who had every reason to want help of any kind choose to vanish instead of accepting it? Second, what did Nathaniel Ashcroft's search into Ben's life uncover that no one, including Nathaniel himself, ever expected to find? And third, when Ben was finally located, what actually happened in that reunion? And why did it change the direction of both of their lives far more than a simple thank you ever could have? These questions sit at the center of everything that follows. And the answers arrive slower and mean more than anyone watching that street corner that afternoon could have guessed. Nathaniel Ashcroft had spent his entire adult life solving problems the only way he knew how, with resources, with control, with the quiet assumption that enough money applied to any situation would eventually produce the outcome he wanted. He had built an empire on that principle, and it had never once failed him, not until the afternoon he found himself standing on an ordinary sidewalk, unable to offer a boy who had just saved his daughter's life anything the boy was willing to accept. Lily, for her part, remembered details about Ben that the adults around her had been too shaken to notice. Small things, the way he moved, the way he spoke, details that would eventually matter far more than anyone in that moment could have known. What began as a search for a stranger to thank would slowly become something else entirely. Ben Whitfield was 16 years old, and for most of his life, he had understood exactly what it meant to be invisible to people like the Ashcrofts. He lived with his mother and his father in a small rented house on the edge of a town that existed almost entirely in the shadow of Ashcroft Industries, the same company that had once employed half the working families in that community, including his own father, Thomas Whitfield. Thomas had spent nearly 15 years as a skilled mechanical engineer on Ashcroft's manufacturing floor, respected by his co-workers, proud of the work he did, and entirely unprepared for the accident that changed his family's life forever, a piece of failing equipment that the company had been warned about and never repaired in time. The injury left Thomas unable to work the same demanding physical job he had built his identity around, and the settlement Ashcroft Industries offered, back when Nathaniel Ashcroft was still a rising executive rather than the man now running the entire company, was small enough to feel almost like an insult once the medical bills started arriving. Ben grew up watching his father struggle with pain that never fully went away, watching his mother take on a second job to cover what one income no longer could, and watching, most of all, how quickly a company that had once celebrated his father's work simply moved on without him, as though he had never mattered to them at all. Nobody in Ben's house spoke badly about the Ashcroft name out loud. They didn't need to. The silence around it said enough. By the time Ben was old enough to understand the full shape of what had happened, he had already built a quiet, careful kind of pride around never asking anyone for anything, especially not anyone connected to the family whose company had left his father the way it did. He worked odd jobs after school, helped cover groceries when he could, and walked the same streets near the Ashcroft estate almost every day without ever once considering what it might mean to be noticed by the people inside those gates. He wasn't looking for a moment that would change anything. He was simply walking home the way he always did, on the exact afternoon that a car came speeding through an intersection toward a little girl he had never met. The afternoon started the way most afternoons did for both families, entirely unremarkable in every way that mattered. Lily Ashcroft, 7 years old and rarely allowed outside without at least one member of her father's security detail nearby, had slipped just a few steps ahead of her nanny while admiring a dog across the street. The kind of small, ordinary moment that happens 1,000 times a day in 1,000 different families without consequence. What made this particular moment different was the car approaching the intersection at a speed the driver would later admit he never should have been going, distracted for the few critical seconds that separate an uneventful afternoon from a tragedy. Ben was walking home from his shift at a hardware store 2 blocks away, close enough to see Lily step off the curb and close enough to understand. In the same instant, everyone else on that street was still processing what they were seeing, exactly what was about to happen if nobody intervened immediately. He didn't think about who she was. He didn't think about the security detail scrambling too far behind to reach her in time. He simply moved, closing the distance in the span of a few seconds, and pulling her back onto the sidewalk as the car swept through the intersection, close enough that several witnesses would later describe the sound of it as the loudest thing they had ever heard on that quiet street. The chaos that followed happened all at once. Security racing forward, Lily's nanny crying out, drivers stopping to see if everyone was all right, and in the middle of it, Ben Whitfield standing perfectly still, making sure the shaken little girl beside him was truly unharmed before anyone else even reached them. When Nathaniel Ashcroft arrived moments later, breathless and pale, Ben was already stepping backward, already retreating from the growing crowd of adults converging on the scene. He answered Nathaniel's first question, confirming Lily was all right, and offered almost nothing else. And then, while everyone's attention remained fixed on the little girl who had just been saved, the boy who saved her quietly walked away, leaving behind nothing but a single photograph someone in the crowd had thought to take. Nathaniel Ashcroft did not sleep well that night, or for many nights afterward. The realization that a stranger, a teenager no less, had reacted faster than his own trained security team sat heavily with him, mixed with a gratitude he had no way to properly express to someone who had refused to give even his name. He assigned members of his private security team to the search the following morning, treating it with the same seriousness he applied to any critical business matter, though this particular matter, he found, resisted the kind of straightforward resolution money usually provided. The only lead was a single blurry photograph and a rough description from witnesses who had been too shaken themselves to notice much beyond the boy's quick movement and worn jacket. The search stretched on longer than Nathaniel expected. Several false leads emerged in the first 2 weeks, young men who resembled the boy in the photograph closely enough to prompt hopeful visits that ended in disappointment. Local news coverage of the incident, though it never named Ben directly, generated a wave of public interest, with people across the community speculating about the identity of the mystery boy who had saved a billionaire's daughter and then vanished. Ben, watching some of this coverage from the small television in his living room, said nothing to his parents about what he had done, uncertain how his father in particular would react to hearing the Ashcroft name connected to anything involving their family again. It was Lily, more than anyone else, who eventually provided the detail that changed the direction of the search. She remembered, with the specific clarity children sometimes have for details adults overlook, a small logo stitched onto the strap of Ben's worn backpack, the same logo used by the hardware store 2 blocks from where the incident occurred. When Nathaniel's investigators followed that single thread to the store and eventually to the employment records showing a recently hired teenager named Ben Whitfield, an entirely different piece of information surfaced alongside it, one Nathaniel had never expected to see connected to this search at all. The surname Whitfield appeared in Ashcroft Industries' own personnel archives, attached to a workplace injury claim from nearly a decade earlier. Nathaniel sat with that file for a long time before he understood the full weight of what he was looking at. Thomas Whitfield, injured in an accident involving equipment the company had been formally warned about and failed to repair, compensated with a settlement Nathaniel now recognized, looking back with the perspective a decade of experience had given him, as inadequate for what the man and his family had actually lost. Nathaniel had not personally overseen that settlement, had been junior enough at the time to have limited influence over it, but the company whose name he now carried had made that decision, and the consequences of it had rippled all the way down to a teenage boy who had just saved his daughter's life and asked for absolutely nothing in return. Understanding this changed the entire shape of what Nathaniel felt he needed to do. This was no longer simply a matter of finding a stranger to thank. It was a reckoning with a debt his own company had left unpaid for nearly 10 years, one that had shaped Ben's entire childhood in ways Nathaniel was only now beginning to grasp. When Nathaniel finally arrived at the Whitfield family's small rented house, he came without cameras, without his usual entourage, and without the practiced confidence he carried into every other room he had ever walked into. Ben opened the door, visibly startled to see him standing there, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. What followed was not the simple, tidy reunion either family might have expected from a story like this one. Thomas Whitfield, meeting the head of Ashcroft Industries for the first time in nearly a decade, made no effort to hide the complicated mixture of feelings the visit stirred in him. Nathaniel did not try to smooth over that discomfort with easy apologies or immediate offers of compensation. He simply sat, listened to what the accident and its aftermath had actually cost this family, and acknowledged, plainly and without deflection, that his company had failed them long before his daughter ever needed saving. It was Ben, quiet through most of the conversation, who finally spoke, admitting that the reason he had walked away that day had very little to do with modesty and everything to do with not wanting anything from the Ashcroft name at all. What Nathaniel did next mattered more than any single conversation could have. He did not offer the Whitfield family a check meant to close the matter quickly and quietly, the kind of gesture that would have confirmed every assumption Ben had grown up with about how people like the Ashcrofts handled inconvenient debts. Instead, he opened a genuine review of his company's old injury compensation practices, uncovering several other cases from the same era that had been handled with similar inadequacy, and established a fund specifically meant to address them properly, decades late, but addressed nonetheless. For Thomas, it meant access to a specialist who could finally offer some relief from pain he had lived with for years. For the Whitfield family as a whole, it meant a kind of acknowledgement that had never been available to them before, regardless of what it changed financially. For Ben himself, Nathaniel offered something more specific, an apprenticeship within Ashcroft Industries' engineering division, not as a symbolic gesture, but as a genuine opportunity built around the same sharp instincts and quick thinking that had saved Lily's life in the first place. Ben accepted it slowly, cautiously, on his own terms, making clear that he wanted to earn his place there the same way his father once had, not simply be handed one because of what had happened on that sidewalk. Lily, for her part, never stopped asking about the boy who had saved her, and in the years that followed, a quiet, genuine friendship grew between the two families, one built not on guilt or obligation, but on the slow, difficult work of actually making things right. Was it simply luck that put Ben Whitfield on that sidewalk at exactly the right moment, or was there something more complicated at work? A decade-old debt finally finding its way back to the surface in the most unexpected way possible. Perhaps it was both. What remains true is this. A boy who had every reason to walk away from the Ashcroft name chose, without hesitation, to save a little girl who had nothing to do with the debt his family was owed, and in doing so, forced a wealthy man to finally reckon with a mistake his company had spent 10 years pretending didn't exist. What do you think? Would you have walked away the way Ben did? Or would you have stayed to make sure the Ashcroft family understood exactly what their company had cost your family? Let us know in the comments below. We read every single one of them. And if this story moved you the way we hope it did, wait until you hear about the next case. involving a stranger whose act of kindness uncovered a secret an entire family had been keeping for generations. Subscribe now so you never miss the next real story of second chances, quiet courage, and the debts that eventually find their way back to being paid.